According to alchemy's metaphysical system, each planetary force is supposed to enact some kind of influence over the base matter in the retort during the course of the operation. The formative forces of Saturn, Jupiter, and the Moon exert their effects during the first stage, known as the lesser work, a cycle of processes which have as their aim the synthesis of the white stone, what alchemy calls the white stone. Alternatively, those of Venus, Mars, and the Sun come to the forefront during the second stage, known as the greater work, another cluster of processes which further act upon the white stone to garner the red stone. Pivotal to the entire magnum opus, and its culmination is the timing chosen by the alchemist to commence his or her work. Traditionally, the favoured period is spring, or between the months of March and May, a time when the generative powers of Mother Nature are proliferating. It should also be worth noting here that in a great number of successful cases, metallic transmutation involving a metamorphosis of red mercury or quicksilver into gold was juxtaposed by a conjunction between their celestial counterparts in the starry heavens, in this case Mercury and the Sun. Hermetic author Nick Colostrum examined this topic in his book, The Metal-Planet Relationship, a study of celestial influence, and found that 5 out of 7 astrological charts demarcating the exact moment a master alchemist engaged projection or made gold were marked by an auspicious condition in the heavens where the planet Mercury and the solar orb stood within 5 degrees of one another. This study becomes much more substantial when one discerns that only 4 of the 7 charts examined involve red mercury as the base metal. The other 2 were lead and silver, respectively. All this seems to suggest that the formative forces of planet Earth, the world soul or anima mundi, and the astrological movement are key players when it comes to the synthesis of red Earth and the divine metamorphosis of first matter or base metals into gold. Speaking in a context apprehensible to the alchemists and in harmony with the Hermetic tenet as above, so below, we could say that the active planetary powers subtly and divinely, if you like, influence the matter in the crucible. But for all this to be viable, the ancient connection between the planets and their respective metals must stand up to the mechanistic scrutiny of scientific method and analysis. Is there really a connection between the metal lead and Saturn, Quicksilver and Mercury, silver and the Moon, or gold and the Sun? Or is it all just ancient superstition and scrambled guesswork? The implications of an energetic syncretization between the planets, the metals and human consciousness falls way outside the scope of conventionally orientated thought at this point in time. As preposterous as it may seem at first, the idea begins to suspend disbelief if we proceed along the logical avenue that all planetary bodies, including the Earth, are like magnets, and that each exerts a gravitational pull on the others. If one continued along the same train of thought, entirely scientific and credible, I might add, he or she would see that the waxing and waning of this gravitational force is hinged entirely upon the planet's relative position to the other heavenly spheres. Indeed, humans and all living creatures are unconsciously wired to them, though it appears that only the more intellectually adroit and curiously inclined ever come to terms with this fact during the course of their lives. When shamans of many primordial tribes and the priests and priestesses of past matriarchal religions discerned these living, interacting energies that pervaded the cosmos, it mattered not that their naked eye could see no further than Jupiter, or that the Sun and Moon were erroneously thought to be planets. The celestial spheres were merely exoteric markers for the qualitative powers that governed our multidimensional and majestic universe. Interestingly, this perceptible association between the planetary spheres and their rulership over the metals becomes even more of a reality when we take into account a series of experiments that were conducted by Frau Lili Kalisko, a follower and confidante of anthroposophist Dr. Rudolf Steiner. Kalisko was convinced that the planet-metal relationship rudimentary to the holistic cosmogony of most primordial cultures wasn't imaginary and illusory at all. It was, on the contrary, real, observable, and quantifiable. She devised a chromatographical method whereby filter papers were used to transcribe or record chemical changes that occurred in metal salt solutions when their celestial constituents entered into conjunctions and oppositions with one another. Under strictly controlled conditions, Callisto was able to show that the images or pictures produced by the silver salt solutions encompassed a striking resemblance to the crater-ravaged surface of the moon, and that certain characteristics manifested at the appearance of each lunar phase, particularly the full and new moons. So, some of Callisto's most dramatic experiments involved exploring the sun and the middle gold. To discern a hermetic connection between the two, she set up a series of tightly controlled experiments whose primary aim was to observe changes that could occur on filter papers dipped in metallic salt solutions of gold chloride before, during the course of, and after a solar eclipse. When gold chloride remained unobstructed in conditions of pitch darkness, Callisto and her assistants noted that it manifested scarlet reds, bright yellows, royal purples, and other auric colours onto filter paper films. To provide a condensed summa of her results, Callisto found that during the course of a solar eclipse which occurred on June the 29th, 1927, the salt solutions reacting in the laboratory didn't produce customary pictures of the radiant and vibrant aurora. Instead, they showed up as an agglomeration of filthy reddish and purple browns, as if an invisible hand had somehow reached out, smudged them over with a paintbrush, and subsequently dotted them over with black specks. At this time, the gold chloride also lost its aptitude to rise along the length of the filter papers, mirroring the condition of a solar orb temporarily emasculated by the overspreading sphere of the moon. After the eclipse, the qualities and behaviours exhibited by reactions of gold chloride in a dark room returned to normal. The implications of Callisto's results were comprehensive and stupefying. Against all odds, it appeared that the gold was unconsciously wired to somehow express the prevailing condition of its celestial equivalent. Just as the solar energies were blunted by the eclipse, so too was the eternal metal prevented from expressing its cheerfulness and splendour through the manifestation of brilliant colours like scarlet reds, golden yellows, and magenta. When the lunar disk finally liberated the formative powers of the sun again, so did the powers of gold wax upon the face of the earth. From the 1920s until the 1960s, Callisto expanded the breadth of her monumental research to encompass the behaviour of other metallic salts during solar eclipses. In an ensuing cycle of experiments, she was able to show that filter paper films dipped in a reagent of gold chloride and silver nitrate acquired a stone-washed violet hue that degenerated into Stygian darkness the exact moment the lunar disk passed over the sun. This indicated, among other things, that the silver was imitating its planetary constituent in the heavens by eclipsing the rich colours of gold chloride. Moreover, the films laid bare subtle changes to the inner texture of the participating metals that were obviously the result of a previously unknown chemical reaction or an interaction of some kind. If such a phenomenon applied to all metals and planetary bodies, then mercuric bichloride and gold chloride should behave in a similar fashion upon a conjunction of Mercury and the Sun, the two planetary forces intimately entwined in the above-mentioned examples of metallic transmutation. True. Agnes Fife, a researcher from a cancer clinic in Arlesheim in Switzerland, launched an extensive investigation into the corporeal effects of a Sun-Mercury conjunction using the diluted sap of plants traditionally ascribed to the rulership of their respective planets, in this case mistletoe and iris. Her results revealed a change in the reagent during the superior and inferior conjunctions, with the former demonstrating a definite reaction by rising along the herbal filter papers. Aside from the inference that the mistletoe plant comes under the aegis of the solar signature, her experiments did little to shed light upon the dynamics of the Sun-Mercury conjunction. Fife supplanted the metallic salts with plant saps on the premise that living matter would react more robustly to celestial phenomena than any inert material might. Her method may have been partially influenced by the fact that mercury bichloride is colourless and thus excruciatingly difficult to quantify in controlled settings. In the end, the decision to shift the focus away from the mineral kingdom may have been premature, for in doing so she introduced unforeseen variables and controls into her experimental method that left her vulnerable to a barrage of attacks such as the ones that were to come from elite members of the scientific community shortly afterwards. At any rate, Fyfe's blunders and misfortunes should not deter the intellectually rebellious and progressive from exploring the reactions of mercury bichloride, gold chloride reagent over Sun-Mercury conjunctions, as subtle changes spurred by the astrological movement may very well provide the necessary clues to unravelling the paradox of chemical transmutation. In 1978, Fyfe used a filter paper method not unlike the one that was used by Callisto to describe whether the annual planetary movements of Venus would have any discernible effect upon 1% copper acetate solutions that had been placed inside extracts of plant sap. Just like the planet enacted its most powerful impression upon human consciousness when it was allowed to shine in the twilight glow of early morning as the Eosphoros, or the bringer of dawn, or in the late evening as Espheros, the star of the evening, the metallic reactions on the filter papers were strongest when Venus assumed positions in the sky in which it remained unobstructed by the sun. Callisto's experiments using gold chloride and copper salt solutions to discern changes in filter papers during a solar Venusian conjunction were equally astonishing, revealing a dramatic precipitation of light green along the plastic films when Venus was at its highest point in the sky. A curious observation that came to light during the experimentation phase of the solar Venusian experiments was the reaction rate varied with the changing of the seasons. This was both odd and extraordinary. How could a chemical reaction vary according to the time of the year? Strange, no? Orthodox science remains curiously silent on such issues, given that its doctrines decree that chemical reactions should not vary with seasonal rotation. Callisto claimed that the strength of the reactions dissipated and disappeared between December and January, only to reappear again stronger than ever between the months of March and May. Save for being the equinoctial marker for spring, the said months comprise the premium time in which the laborious processes of the alchemical great work should commence. Astrologically, it is the period in which the sun rises in the constellation of Taurus, a time in which the Venusian energy becomes most expressive and powerful. As we can see, the occult connections are plentiful and far too meaningful to be purely coincidental. Many of Callisto's experiments, particularly those that trace the Mars-Saturn conjunction, were replicated in 1949 by Theodor Schwenk and again in 1964 by Dr. Karl Voss of Hamburg. Both scholars successfully reproduced the same results and dutifully arrived at the same conclusions as Callisto, publishing their works in various astrology journals in an attempt to spur further studies in astrochemistry and eventually integrate these scientific demonstrable theories into our communal knowledge. Sadly, the implications of such were perceived to be heretical and controversial by the scientific community. And before long, the negative sentiment had spilt over to the greater community, to the literati, university presses and media, all of whom ignored them completely. The reception of silence ensued that, in time, all memory and trace of experimental data in support of qualitative content and the holistic cosmology of our ancestors would be forgotten completely.